Mr. Ross Coulthart.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Look, I have to say, as a journalist, I get very uncomfortable with the incredible degree of goodwill and kindness that comes from everybody here at Contact in the Desert. I'm so unused to it, you know. When I first started writing my book, and I was agonising about this phenomenon, this mystery of UAPs, and I'd gone through that ontological shock of realising that the people who I thought would tell me that this was all rubbish were actually saying to me, Ross, this is real. You need to take this seriously. And these were people in intelligence and defence, because I've worked at a very high level in covering horrible wars and national intelligence stories. I broke a story many, many years ago, actually, to my embarrassment, 31 years ago, that revealed the existence of what's called the Echelon Communications Surveillance System, which is a worldwide surveillance system of all electronic communications by the Five Eyes Alliance. And it led me into a world where I developed contacts, people who were prepared to open up to me and exchange ideas about what's really going on in the world. And it was fascinating because some of those people kept in touch with me and they were telling me that this was real. One thing, though, that I have to admit I steered clear of in my investigations was a very taboo subject, the most taboo subject inside the subject of UFOs, UAPs. And that's the story I want to talk about today. It's the vexing issue for me as a journalist of how to cover abductions, military abductions, people who describe often, let's be honest about it, ridiculous sounding encounters with non-human intelligences. And it's funny, you know, because one of the things I've noticed as you get more high profile in this subject is there's a lot of people in UAP social media who are no doubt well-intentioned, and they completely, I think, out of a good sense of, kindness in pushing the issue along, they often misrepresent what I'm trying to do. I'm probably guilty of oversharing at times because, for example, just the other day I did an interview with somebody and they said, what about this 2027 date? And I said, oh yeah, I'm hearing about that. You know, there's a few stories. What are those stories? And of course I related a few of the stories that I've heard. And then the next thing I know, it's Coulthart says 2027 is going to be a catastrophe. And I really honestly have no idea. And I want to caution you all, a journalist, is only ever as good as their sources. We get things wrong. And I'm not saying I'm wrong. I just want to caution all of you that I'm only as good as the people who I'm trusting to share me information. And so with that, I want to take you down the rabbit hole of what I'm currently interested in. I've recently dipped my toe into the water of this most ridiculed and stigmatized area of anomalous phenomena. People who claim to be experiencers or abductees, people who assert they've had what's called sometimes a CE5 experience, a communication or an interaction directly with a non-human intelligence, allegedly, which they say often is terrifying. Sometimes the people describe being hurt, abused, or experimented upon by apparent non-human beings. I was interviewing Whitley Strieber yesterday, and thank you to Whitley for being so kind and generous with his time, and I was so excited to meet him because I loved his books when I was younger. But like everyone, when I was at university, I giggled too when he started talking about rectal probes. And of course, it's gone into the vernacular that, you know, if you get taken by aliens, you get rectally probed. But when you think about it, it means that if it's true, this poor man has been victimized, vilified, and ridiculed for decades now for telling what he experienced. Now, the question in my mind is, how do I deal with that experience? How do I deal with what Jake Barber described to me when he did an interview with me in January that he'd had this encounter, I've just lost audio. He had this encounter with a feminine divine. And was it a genuine feminine divine? Was it something awesomely benevolent and loving, as he describes? Or was it, as Whitley at one stage did suggest, and we discussed this yesterday, was it the phenomenon being deceitful, trickery? So who's right and who's wrong? How do we assess if the people describing these reported experiences are being deceived or misled, or if the experiences are actually real? I'd like to welcome in the audience here a good friend of mine, Colonel John Blitch, who made the courageous decision earlier this year to describe his own abduction experience in his interview with me in the Jake Barber special we did for News Nation. It was quite something to hear John, who is a former Pershing II nuclear missile battery commander, a former Special Forces detachment commander, and a former troop commander at the Combat Applications Group, which you probably all better know as Delta Force. It was incredible to hear a man like John, of his caliber, talk about such an extraordinary event. As well as his illustrious military service, John's worked at DARPA as a program manager. He's got a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering, a master's in math and computer science, a second master's and doctorate in cognitive psychology. So he's an open-minded cognitive scientist who served as a visiting professor at the US Air Force Academy, as well as a consultant for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, NASA, and all sorts of other government agencies. He's no ordinary grunt. And John, I'm looking forward to having you up later to try and explain to me what this all means. John's courage in being willing to tell his story and his obvious credibility. You don't put somebody in charge of nuclear missiles unless you know they are a stable, sane, non-crazy human being. It compelled me to start taking the abduction phenomenon seriously. I don't pretend to know what's going on, but I sure as hell think it's time we started trying to understand a phenomenon that's being reported by tens of thousands of people all over the world. In fact, I was talking to John earlier, and he said that when they were looking at the percentages of research that had been done on people who say they've been abducted, it's possibly in the millions. Something is going on. So this is my attempt to work it out, and I'm hoping all of you can help me figure it out. I'm going to talk probably for 50 or so minutes. I'm going to bring John on, and then I'm happy to take Q&As from the audience. In his interview, John described meeting a 7-foot-tall praying mantis being that told him the human body is merely a machine or vessel that houses the soul, and they couldn't take his soul or consciousness. He told me how he suspects the entities use weather phenomena as cover, that they're highly technologically advanced, that they can manipulate human memory to minimize trauma. He described missing time, 5 hours lost, which was supposedly a 1-hour bike ride. I've collected now literally thousands of these kind of accounts since I expressed interest in investigating these encounters. I have to admit, it's felt almost paranormal to have people from all over the world tell me that they felt an absolute urge to reach out to me. And I go, what do you mean? And they said, I just know I have to tell you this. And I have to admit, sometimes it's actually got really annoying. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've been getting somewhere between 10 to 15,000 emails a week since the Jake Barber interview. And a huge number of them are from people who've suffered what they describe as abductions, MyLab experiences, often frightening and confronting encounters with some kind of non-human intelligence. So I'm wrestling with how to report, and indeed whether to report and investigate these experiences. Are they real, or are they some kind of induced memory of some kind? What the hell is going on? John's championed other military personnel, and you've all heard their stories: Terry Lovelace, Mario Woods, Jeff Goodrich, and Bob Jacobs. Are they all deluded or mentally ill, as the debunkers often like to suggest? Now, for me, as a journalist, the dilemma in trying to make sense of these subjects is, what on earth are we as investigators meant to make of these encounters and abductions? Are they real, or are they perhaps some kind of induced manipulation of our perception, perhaps a Slide 9 event? One major issue that we have to address is just how manipulable human perception is. As you may all likely know, Slide 9 was part of a leaked briefing that was given to an undersecretary of the US Department of Defense by members of the UAP investigation team inside the Pentagon. And there was a finding in the Slide 9 slide that I reported in my book. It said, "The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate US facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security." When I first read that, I thought it sounded like something out of the Manchurian Candidate. But I do think Slide 9's implications are woefully underplayed and overlooked by all of us investigating the phenomenon. This was an official, high-level, top-secret briefing at the highest levels of the Pentagon. It talked about psychotronic weapons. These aren't meant to exist, of course, but they're devices that are claimed to manipulate or harm a person's psychological state, thoughts, or bodily functions using electromagnetic waves, infrasound, or other non-conventional energy forms. Slide 9 also talked about, like, wacky stuff: alteration, manipulation of biological organisms, anomalies in the space-time construct, unique cognitive human interface experiences, whatever the hell they are. And importantly, it acknowledged in this secret briefing, Defense Department has been involved in similar experiments in the past. I keep on coming back to that. It sounds like something more than the MK Ultra CIA type stuff that was exposed in the 1970s. And if psychotronic weapons exist, it's never been publicly disclosed. Yet the existence of psychotronic weapons is verified in the leaked Slide 9 documents. It also puts the investigations that are still ongoing into Havana syndrome into a different perspective. These are, of course, a whole series of mystery, unexplained health incidents, first reported in 2016 by US and Canadian diplomats in Havana, Cuba. Symptoms are weird: headaches, dizziness, nausea, vertigo, hearing voices, strange sensations, cognitive issues, intense fatigue. These cases have been reported globally, affecting diplomats, intelligence officers, military personnel. I've interviewed many of them. They're good people. 1,500 cases have been formally documented, many victims reporting long-term debilitating effects. A 2020 National Academy Sciences report definitively concluded that directed pulsed radio frequency energy was the most likely cause. One thing, though, that I have to admit I steered clear of